The best part of this Ahsoka show is that Han Solo must still be alive. Because apparently getting impaled by a lightsaber is the equivalent of what? Stubbing your toe? Oh, and by the way, there are Shawshank Redemption actors in this show, including the guy who plows Andy Dufresne in the showers. Anyway, hit the like button. Because what happens when you've been fed horse dung for 2 years, and then all of a sudden I put a plate of salad in front of you? You're gonna act like that salad was the greatest thing in the world. Because that's essentially what's happening here. That Obi-Wan TV show was so bad that it actually made me start to hate Star Wars. And then the Mando season 3 happened and it was just like, forget about it. Give the franchise back to George Lucas. Sell it to him for $1 because why the do you need Star Wars for, Disney? You've got work to do when it comes to the movies coming out under your banner anyway. The bar has been put so low from Mando season 3 and Obi-Wan that anything that comes out now that's even slightly good is seen as perfection. Now we're gonna get to some pros and cons in a minute, but as hot as a lightsaber would need to be in order to cut through the thickest steel that we've seen so many times, and then getting stabbed by such lightsaber blade would cause that person's blood to instantly start boiling and incinerate all of their organs, and then ultimately cause their body to spontaneously combust. Death would pretty much be instantaneous, even with immediate sophisticated medical care. But haha, no, not in Disney Star Wars, because in Disney Star Wars, lightsabers are almost non-lethal. They're more akin to a stun gun rather than a lethal weapon of war of a more civilized era. After The Last Jedi, we need to realize that not everybody needs force powers. I am just sick and tired of seeing everybody use the force like it's some kind of accessory. But that gets to my next point about this scene. Not only is this scene ridiculous, but it lowers the stakes for the rest of the show. How am I supposed to believe that any of these fights matter when the person who loses gets up like it's another Tuesday? And by the way, why are they all gut shots? I mean, why don't you chop off a hand or a leg? That would be more realistic. After all, cybernetics are a thing in Star Wars, so you can use that. If I was going to fight someone with a lightsaber, just humor me for a second. I am not going to stab you, I am going to slice you. Anyway, I can already hear some of the Disney shills screeching and screaming. What about Darth Maul surviving getting cut in half in episode 1 and then coming back in the Clone Wars? Can you explain that? Yes, I will, and I will tell you, I didn't like that either. Darth Maul surviving getting cut in half was ridiculous. But at least with Darth Maul, he probably spent years healing, and even then it took a Night Sister to help. And then Anakin or Vader needed cybernetics and was in great pain for the rest of his life. There has to be consequences when you lose, otherwise who cares? There's also something to be said about both Vader and Darth Maul are dark side users. They probably use their hate or fear to sustain themselves. This Sabine Wren character did neither. And even a trained light side master like Qui-Gon Jinn couldn't bring himself back from death. But Sabine Wren, who apparently barely has any force training at all, can come back. That just doesn't make any sense, does it? See, when you're a trained Disney cock smoker, you constantly live in the world of whataboutism without taking into account that all of this stuff is equally moronic. But at least there was some attempt to make it less moronic. But before all that, let's talk about the positives, because there were some. We finally have a more trained villain defeat an inexperienced good guy, like in episode 5 with Luke and Vader. That makes it more realistic and keeps the integrity of the villain intact. Because Rey Palpatine defeating Kylo in the first movie without any training is the original sin of the sequel trilogy. Anyway, look, the character Baylan, played by Ray Stevenson, is probably the most aesthetically placed Star Wars character I've seen in the past 20 years. He fits so well in that world, and he steals every scene he's in with his presence alone. I'll be very curious to see the Baylan story play out. It was a surprise to be sure. Another positive of Ahsoka is exploring the mysteries of the galaxy. It'll be interesting to see how they expand on the Witches of Dathomir. And let's speak about Dave Filoni for a second. I do think that Dave is a net positive for the future of Star Wars as a whole, but his blatant disregard for established canon is jarring. I absolutely hate it, but I guess Pablo Hidalgo is still too busy bullying people online trying to stop Filoni. And let's talk about the Shin character because I do find her interesting. She seems like a disciplined dark side user, unlike the petulant brats who are Kylo and Reva. To be honest, I could have just done with a show about Baylan instead of this Sabine character. You know, to me, this felt closer to a George Lucas Star Wars than anything else produced in the Disney era. It's closer to George Lucas than you think because holy the dialogue, everybody sounds asleep. It's prequel level bad. It's so bad that you spend your time focusing on Ahsoka crossing her arms every 2 seconds because your mind is drifting away because the dialogue is so boring. Look, I know that Star Wars is known for its shitty dialogue dating back to A New Hope and that George Lucas is a terrible screenwriter as witnessed in Attack of the Clones. George Lucas might actually be one of the few people who's happy about the writer's strike because then he'll never need to write another script again. He could just tell an AI to do it. And one thing we need to realize is that George Lucas is the type of director who didn't want much dialogue in his films. Georgie boy wanted more abstract films where the audience figures it out without the dialogue. I think George thinks of himself as a silent film director. If you've ever seen THX 1138, it's very much like Ahsoka. Plenty of dead silence and weird immersion breaking dialogue. The dialogue in Ahsoka had these weird pauses like the character were robots slowly processing each emotionless line before delivering it. Nobody does that in real life. Anyway, let's get to, oh yeah, the MacGuffin. The fucking MacGuffin. This map is currently my biggest issue with the story. It's nowhere close as idiotic as the Sith dagger was in The Rise of Palpatine. That disgusting diabolical bile sprayed out by J.J. Abrams. That man should never make a movie again. He should be banned from making films. Anyway, this MacGuffin does raise some big questions. Why would Ahsoka leave the map in the hands of someone who she knows to be stubborn? That is just silly. I mean, would you leave the most important, valuable map that could lead to a violent uprising in the hands of someone who's, quote, stubborn and might possibly run away with it? Because if Thrawn is such a big threat and Ahsoka needs help, why would she go to Sabine and not Luke Skywalker? Wouldn't Luke, Han, and Leia be involved with this somehow? That's just a question I have. And the scene of Ahsoka puzzle solving to get the map was just so boring and felt like a wannabe Indiana Jones film. This whole MacGuffin search trope is getting really annoying at this point. They could have just had this Sabine character calculating various hyperspace routes. Anyway, that's all I have to say. It's better than Obi-Wan and Mando Season 3. But then again, me videotaping myself taking a shit would also be better than those two. Look, the bottom line is that I did feel like there were some characters that I was intrigued in seeing their journey go further. Like Baylan, for example. But then there are characters I would love to see get drowned in a Bacta tank like Sabine. Stop spending 25 minutes of your runtime on her. I mean, no one cares. Spend that on Ahsoka. Because that's why the we're here. The show's called Ahsoka, right? The point I'm trying to make is that the show isn't a 9 out of 10 masterpiece, but it's also not terrible. It's not even average. It's above average. You're welcome. Mannix out.